G'day, my name's Gordon Dedman and welcome to another episode of Bushcraft Survival. In this series we're going to be looking at various aspects of Australian bushcraft, survival and outdoor bush skills. In today's episode we're going to be having a look at how to construct an improvised emergency shelter using a garbage bag and a space blanket. In order to construct this very simple shelter, all you need is a good strong garbage bag or drum liner. Now you want the strong industrial strength wheelie bin liners you can get from Bunnings, but unfortunately the ones in Australia aren't that strong. They're a bit weak and flimsy. This one happens to be a 55-gallon drum liner that I've gotten from the States. Very thick and durable. It's about 2 mil thick, and or in litres that's about 240 litres. So ideally you want to get the thickest and strongest one you can, but at the end of the day you're going to have to use what you have at hand and you have to improvise with what you've got. The next item is a space blanket. Now this is the reusable kind developed by NASA, and this is very effective in reflecting your body heat back to you. It's disposable and one-use item, and anyone that's actually tried to refold these up and put them in the back in the packet will know why they're one-use item, but they are very good, and we'll see how that works in conjunction with our garbage bag. Our next item is some form of cordage. The cordage I have today is some parachute cord or paracord, and it is characterized by having the 7 inner strands, which can be broken down and used for many other purposes. That's not essential for today's purpose, but it is a very good form of cordage. If you don't have cordage, you need to make it in nature and use some natural cordage. And our last thing we need is some duct tape and cargo tape. Once again, part of our 10-piece kit. I've taken some cargo tape and I've put this onto a smaller spindle, which takes up less room in my pack. With those items we can create and construct a very simple emergency shelter. The first thing we need to do when erecting any kind of shelter is to first choose an appropriate site. I've firstly located 2 trees that are the correct distance apart for my needs. I've looked up to make sure there's no deadfall that's going to come crashing down on us. I've looked all around to make sure we're not going to be setting our shelter up on a game trail or on an ant's nest or some other thing like that. I want to also make sure that I'm not going to get any runoff if there happens to be a downfall during the night. Now I'm in northern Australia up near Darwin, so there's no chance of that at the moment because we're in the dry season. However, in a wet environment you need to consider that, and in the wet season up here that's very much a problem. So you need to adjust your shelter to the conditions, the prevailing conditions. And ideally I want to make sure that the ground around the shelter is flat so that we have a comfortable night's sleep. Very important. And we also need to clear the ground from any debris. However, some of that debris may be useful in constructing a nice soft bed, because the other important element of having a good shelter is being able to get a good night's sleep. So that's very important. And if you satisfy all those criteria, then you should be good. Well, once we get our shelter, the first thing we need to do is cut it open to the dimensions of the shelter we need. Now, ideally, if you don't have to cut a garbage bag open, you don't want to do that, because when it's uncut, this enables us to carry water, we can carry things in it, we can actually cut a hole in the top and use it as a raincoat. There are many different things we can use it for as is. So if you've got no other choice and you need to make a shelter with this quickly, what we need to do is cut along 2 of the seams in order to open this out to make quite a larger surface area that's going to protect us against rain. And how we do that is we open it up, and with our knife, you have a sharp cutting tool, we need to cut carefully along the seams. Now, the more neatly you do this, the the neater the shelter is going to be, and it's actually going to make it a lot easier to erect later, and there won't be any holes in it. Now what we want to do is we need to be able to hold this very, very taut when we're doing it. If you've got a second person to help you, that makes it a lot easier, but if you're on your own and you need to make it an emergency shelter, you're probably not going to have someone with you. So what I'm doing is down one side, the long side, I'm just starting a very simple cut, and I'm just running my knife along there. Now it might be, and I'm just going to go all the way along there until I reach one end, trying to keep it as taut as possible. I'm going to cut down the other side. Now once we've finished making our cuts with our knife, we should end up with a large shelter. And as you can see, it is quite large. Now some of the garbage bags you get are going to have pleats in, and it's not going to turn out this neatly. So it depends on the type of garbage bag you get. I did make a little bit of a slip. Sometimes it's hard not to, but you want to cut it as neatly as you can. It's probably the hardest part of putting up this shelter, is actually cutting the shelter up so that it's nice and neat, because that's going to help when we tie our knots and the overall tension of the shelter in the end. So you want to make it as good as you can get it. So once we have our shelter cut, our next job is to get our cordage and tie it to a tree. So I've already pre-cut some of my cordage up into some equal lengths, taken out of your hank of paracord or whatever form of cordage you use, and we're going to go across to our first tree, and we're going to tie a couple of simple knots that is going to secure this garbage bag to the tree, and a particular type of knot that is not going to allow the plastic to tear. Now the first knot we need to learn to tie is the sheet bend. Now to demonstrate this knot, I'm going to show you on two different colours of paracord to help you see what's going on before we apply the knot to the plastic. So I've got some green paracord and some khaki paracord. And the easiest way to think about that is, firstly, with one side we're going to create a loop or a bite. So we create a bite with one end. With our other piece of paracord, we come up through the hole, around the tree, and then back under itself, but not going back through the hole. And what that does, that pulls on itself like that. So let's tie that again. So firstly what we need to do is get one end, in this case the green paracord, and we make a loop or a bite in one end. We then take our second piece and we come up through the hole, we go around the tree or around the green bit of paracord, and then back under itself. But we're not going back through the hole the second time. It sits on top. Then all we do is pull the long end, this one here, until that bites on itself. And that is a very, very effective way of tying two pieces of cord together. It works great for natural cordage particularly. And that is the sheet bend. Now all we need to do is transfer that knot onto a piece of plastic. So in order to tie this sheet bend to our garbage bag, what we need to do is firstly take one corner of our open garbage bag and we're going to roll that into a small sausage, like that. Then we just bend that over and that becomes our loop. Then all we need to do is take our piece of paracord and once again, like we did with the green paracord, we pass the paracord up through the hole, round the tree, and then back under itself, but not going back through the hole. Keeping this held together, don't let go of the plastic, pull on the long end, and that will close up on itself. Don't pull so hard that you pull this bit of paracord over the end of your loop. Very important not to do that. Now, once you do that, you have now created a sheet bend using the plastic. And this is very effective because it holds very, very strong. And if we need to undo it, it's very easy not to undo. And we just unroll the plastic, and we haven't ripped the plastic at all, and we haven't put a hole in it. Works very, very well, and we've kept the integrity of the plastic without destroying it. That's the sheet bend. Okay, for our first knot, we take our first tree, and we're aiming to put our shelter up about waist height. We actually don't want it any higher than that, because then the lean of our shelter is going to be too great, because you want to be able to fit underneath it. So with our cord, the first knot we're going to, we've seen this right about to tie in other episodes. This is the adjustable knot. So at around waist height, we pass the rope around the tree. So one end of our cord goes over the top of the other. Hand goes through the middle. Throw it over the top once, through the middle, over the top twice, and lastly, hand comes underneath, forming a little bite. We then put that through that shape we've just made, pulling it parallel to the cord. That has now formed a prusik, which will tighten on itself, and we can adjust and slide that back and forth as we need. But we're not going to slide it at the moment, because we have to tie our other end up first to get some tension before we can do that. So to tie our second end, once again ensuring we keep that at no higher than waist height, belt height, we come to our second tree, placing our cord around our second tree, and once again, just like our other adjustable knot, rope goes over the top, through the center, over, through the center twice, underneath, forming a small bite, then back through the hole we just created, forming a prusik knot. All we need to do now is, ensuring that's at the right height, is holding one end, we just have to push on that knot, just like we learnt in our other episode, and that's going to give us a nice tight ridge line. Be careful not to tighten it too tight, because once again, even though that's a secure knot, this is still plastic, and if you tie it too tight, it will tear. So it's just a matter of configuring that to the height you want, to the tension you want. By adjusting the knots, you can loosen one end, and you might want your shelter this way or that way. The beauty with these knots is that you can adjust, because it's adjustable. I can slide the knot and loosen the whole thing, or tighten it as I need to, and we can get the shelter exactly where we want it. So we've got the top two guy lines of our shelter tied up, and it's at the right height. All we need to do now is stake out the bottom of our shelter. In order to do that, we need a couple of things first. We need a couple of stakes, and I've just gone and collected those, and when we make a stake, we want it pointed at one end, and we need a chamfer the other end. So using my Mora Garberg, I put a spike at one end, and the beauty of being able to make things on the fly is that you don't have to take anything with you. You can create it in nature, and that's what bushcraft is all about. Then the other end, I want a chamfer for that, and what does that, I can use the chest lever grip to do that, and what that does is it stops that wood from splitting, because all that is just a bundle of fibres, and allows us to hammer that in without splitting it. I'll just quickly do the other one. Making sure I'm cutting away from a body, so when you're cutting, think of where that knife would go if you were to miss. We always want to make sure we're cutting away from the body. And I'm going to chamfer the other end. And we have 2 tent pegs we can use to stake out our plastic sheet. The next thing we have to do is take 2 shorter pieces of paracord, say about 1.5 feet in length, and in one end of one of them we're simply going to tie a thumb knot on the bight, or a granny knot on the bight, and we just simply make a loop and we tie that in to a thumb knot. So in order to tie that thumb knot on the bight, we just simply make a bight or a loop in one end of that short piece of paracord, and we just simply tie a thumb knot or granny knot. And that creates a loop like that, and that will go over our tent peg. Very, very simple and very quick and easy to do. As before, we turn that the third corner into a sausage, and we're going to tie the other end of that, tie a sheet band as we did the other 2 knots to that end. Once again, up through the hole, under itself, and pulling on that, like that. And we just do exactly the same thing to the other end. So once we have our loop, and which is tied to each of the bottom corners of our sheet band, it's just a matter of putting our stake through and pulling our shelter taut. Now, when we do this, it's very important to make sure that we find where the corner is and we pull in the direction the corner's pointing. That way we're going to get the correct tension. The other important point is to make sure that this length here is very short. The longer that is, this shelter's going to be higher, and it's going to be much harder to get it tight, and you're going to have a big gap between the ground. So the shorter the distance between the plastic and your loop, the better. So we take our tent pole, pulling that out so it's taut, being careful, make sure you're pulling in the direction of the corner, and getting a mallet, which in this case is just a bit of a stick, and I hammer that in. Make sure the stake is angled away from the shelter. Pull that there so it's nice and tight. We can tighten this up a little bit as we go. I then take particular note of where that end is. Once again, with this end, I put my stake through and I'm pulling once again in the direction that the corner is pointing. And there we have the basics of a shelter. Now that's pegged out quite nicely. I can tighten this up as I need to adjust the tension, but we're going to do something else to the center of this shelter to actually, you can see how that's actually leaning in. So we're looking at sleeping on the other side of this, and that's going to be annoying because that's going to be flapping against you. So we're going to look at doing something that's going to keep a nice pocket inside that, so it's going to keep the actual shelter from falling on us and from touching us. So we have our shelter pegged out the way we'd like it. It's nice and taut at the top and it's reasonably taut at the bottom, but I don't want it too taut at the bottom yet, because you'll notice that the shelter here is it's leaning in. So once we're inside, that's going to be touching us, so we actually don't want that. So we're going to create pull this back and create a pocket so it's actually not touching us. And how I do that is I need to insert, we're going to create something called a bush button, and we need to actually insert something and create a pocket. Now we can use a round stone or a small piece of fruit, but in this case I've improvised, and there's paper bark all around here, so I've got a little wad of paper bark and I've rolled that into a ball, and with that we're going to create a little pocket, and using a clove hitch we're going to loop that around and create what's known as a bush button. We take our small wad of paper bark, we don't want it too big. Once again, this could be a small rock or a piece of fruit, anything round and smooth. We don't want it jagged because it's going to put holes in our plastic. And what we do, we find the centre of our plastic, and from the inside we need to push that wad into that, and we're creating like a little knob, a button. Then with the other hand, this is a tricky bit because you need 3 hands for this. I can find the other end of the paracord here. I need to tie a clove hitch, and we're going to tie a clove hitch that we use to put over a protrusion. So we tie a loop, or we make a loop in one end of the cord like that over the top, then we create another loop, so we've got like a figure 8. Then we put that second loop behind the first loop, then we put both of those together over our button. This is the tricky bit, trying to hold on to that with one hand while you tighten it. We want that cord to pull in opposite directions like that, and that has made a bush button. Then all we need to do is tie the other end up to a tree, and that's going to allow us to hold that at the distance we want, so it's not going to fall in on us. It's also going to kind of create a pocket inside that will allow the space blanket to hold against and create a nice warm air pocket. So we've tied our bush button. All we need to do now is take a piece of paracord or any sort of cordage, and we're going to tie it around something up high. Now this doesn't need to be held tight. You could almost just very gently loop it over something, and you could do this with natural cordage. It doesn't really matter. It's not load bearing, it's not having any it doesn't need to have a lot of strength. So I'm just going to tie this round an end up here, and once again, to get the tension I need, I can just use our good old friend, the adjustable knot. Tie one of those, very, very versatile knot, and that way I can tighten that to the tension I need. And that's just going to hold that exactly where I like that, which is going to keep it off me, creating a nice pocket to my shelter. And that is our bush button. We now have our garbage bag shelter erected. We could stay in that as it is, and in order to keep the rain off you, that's all you need. So that alone is you could stop there, have a fire and make a bed and turn that into your shelter, and that would be good to go. How we can improve that though is with the use of our space blanket, our disposable space blanket. What we're now going to do to increase its thermal properties by allowing our body heat to be reflected back to us, and particularly if we have a fire out the front and let that bounce around, is by using this space blanket. And what we're going to do, we're going to undo it, and we're simply going to stick it using the duct tape or gaff tape, which is another part of our 10-piece kit. Using these two things, we're actually going to stick it to the garbage bag, and it's going to, you'll see that it actually really improves the thermal properties of this shelter. Now, depending on the size of the space blanket, we'll see how big this is when we open it up, because this may be a lot bigger than our garbage bag, but we'll see what we get. Once again, you don't want to be rolling this one up and folding this back the way it goes. Right. Now, firstly, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the corners and I'm going to simply tie up a corner over the corner just with a very simple thumb knot. Nothing fancy. There's one end, the second end. Once again, tying sausages in the end. Now what we need to do is stick the middle of this into our pocket. And the way we do this is by taking a little bit of our duct tape or gaff tape, ripping it off, and we're just going to make a double-sided bit of gaff tape. In other words, a sticky bit, turn it over on itself so that you've got a tube and both sides are sticky. That's what you want. If both sides are sticky, it's going to stick to both the space blanket and the shelter. So we take that double-sided tape and I'm going to stick that into our bush button, into that little pocket we created. Then all I do is I find the centre, try to keep that tension. I stick that to the bit of tape we just stuck in there. Stick it nice and firmly because we want that to mould. And now we have our shelter. Now this space blanket is a little bit smaller than what I would like. It's a bit short, but you don't know what you got until you open it up. And I would normally tie that off to the corners, but because this is a little bit shorter, we're going to have to use bits of duct tape to do that. So it all depends on what you get. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And there we have it. There is a shelter with the space blanket, very, very effective. And once we lie in it, kept in a ball and a fire out the front, we have the ability of our warm air bouncing around here. Now, in a very cold environment, we would also put down a platform, a bed of leaves, of grass, and all things like that, and you build yourself off the ground so that you're not losing heat from conduction to the cold ground. So very important to make sure you put yourself above the ground. Very, very important. In fact, if you were doing that, we could probably erect this a little bit higher. But that's just one way of we can configure this. So I'm going to go ahead now and just tidy this up a little bit, and we're going to get a fire going and we'll see how this works. Well, this is where this shelter really comes into its own. I've got a fire going. It's close enough so I'm feeling that radiant heat, and I can feel it bouncing around here. In fact, it's being trapped in this pocket and re-radiating towards me. It's very important to have the fire nice and close. If it's too far away, you're not going to get the radiant effect of that fire. Now, even though I'm in northern Australia, it still gets pretty cool at night. And in this instance, I don't have a bed on the ground, but in a cold climate, having a bed, some sort of insulation under you would be absolutely paramount. But it still gets pretty cold here at night. So I'm actually got a nice fire. I can feel it radiating all around me, and it is actually quite warm, but it's a little bit too warm right now. But at about 2 in the morning, it'll be just right. And that fire doesn't need to be any bigger than that. That is plenty big enough. I've actually got my stainless steel water bottle on the fire to boil some water. I've got some water out of the creek, which I'm now purifying, and I'm going to have a nice hot cup of tea. But this shelter works really well. So just using a few knots, sheet bend, thumb knot on the bike, adjustable knot, a garbage bag and a space blanket and some duct tape, you can create a very, very effective shelter, and it's quite quick to put up. You can actually put this up in about 10 minutes if you know what you're doing. And it's very effective, and it's very, very cheap, and it takes up no room at all. You can have a garbage bag and a space blanket and the cordage in your pockets, as well as a knife inside and a ferro rod, and you can actually really, really achieve a lot in a very short period of time. It really is an excellent shelter and a very easy emergency shelter to construct. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode on how to set up an improvised emergency shelter using a garbage bag and a space blanket. If you enjoy these videos, please share them and tell others about them, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. That way we can spread the word and help rekindle bushcraft in Australia. If you're interested in doing one of our bushcraft survival courses, please check out our website www.bushcraftsurvivalaustralia.com.au. My name's Gordon Dedman, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of Bushcraft Survival.